ISA has had a really full schedule with lots of very technical discussions about different aspects related to solar power. And here we want to talk about how we get people excited about this, how youth-driven approaches to climate and solar advocacy. So we've got five phenomenal advocates and communicators on the stage, people who are excellent at talking about climate, convincing people about climate, persuading people on climate. So my goal is going to be to talk as little as possible and have a real conversation among the people on stage. So to start with, can we just give like a, name, organization, what you do, what like the most amazing thing that should happen from COP? Like what's your top priority for COP and the best meal you've had this week? Go ahead.
Hello, hello. Okay, perfect. Hi, my name is Trina Chiemi. I work with Fast Action on Climate to ensure intergenerational justice or face intergenerational justice. And I am a law student. I'm currently working on a youth amicus submission for the Inter American Court of Human Rights on its advisory opinion request on the climate emergency and human rights. We've been working with activists all over the Americas and the Caribbean on this for the last year. The best thing I ate at COP was this salmon thing at the Nordic Grill. I was randomly invited there and it was quite delicious, actually. And for outcomes, I mean, really what we're demanding is the same thing we're always demanding, which is a just and equitable fossil fuel phase out. And I think another thing is to make sure that we call out all the fossil fuel lobbyists that are in attendance with us today.
Yes, thank you. So hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Tahyun Kim from South Korea. So here I am representing a climate slash energy NGO based in Seoul, South Korea called Solutions for Our Climate, short for SFOC. So basically, what we do at SFOC is advocating for key major sectors towards energy transition, which would be power sector, industry sector decarbonization, and oil and gas phase out, including climate finance. So, focusing on these four different key areas, we try to create our own messages and disseminate through various outlets. Encompassing, let's say, legislature, policymakers, diplomatic channels, along with international and domestic media. And also, alongside with my 9 to 6 job at SFOC, I'm also a youth climate activist in South Korea, working with an organization called Geek. For climate geeks, it's also short for Green Environment Youth Korea. So yeah, thank you so much for inviting everyone all over the place. And here at COP, I've been following different discussions surrounding power system reform and discussion about how we could integrate more solar power into our uh, power grids and current very much fossil fuel based power system. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Okay, thank you so much for that. My name is Christopher Clotilde Mribidi, and I am from Zimbabwe. I am a COP28 International Youth Climate Delegate, one of the 100 selected from a pool of 11,000. And I am an IACT trainer capacitated under the International Renewable Energy Agency. I'm also in the SADC Youth Parliament, where I'm serving as the clerk. I am a young person who strongly believes in saving the environment from destruction and serving humanity with distinction. And I also want to point out that I am also a volunteer with the Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association, and I see my colleagues are seated there. Thank you so much for coming. Um, Okay, so for this COP, what I found really interesting is that I met Santa Claus on one of the days, and he actually taught us about the three fingers. He said he was talking about the conscience, and then he said we're supposed to ensure that in everything that we do not harm, um, we do not fear, and we leave it better than we found it. And as for COP, I'm actually looking forward to political commitments that translate to action. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Amelia Murphy. I'm the Deputy Director of the India office at the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development, and we focus on non-CO2 mitigation, so not quite solar, though we do focus on the energy transition a bit. And so this COP, it's really exciting for me to see the focus on non-CO2 pollutants and particularly methane at the high level. And we've seen a lot of commitments to funding. And at IGSD in the India program, we work at the subnational level to help subnational entities, particularly state governments, develop bankable pilot projects and project pipelines to do non CO2 mitigation. And so I'm really excited to see how this funding will actually be mobilized at the subnational level in order to help develop these projects and scale up impact on the ground in India. Um, and my favorite thing I've eaten, I think, was at the Vietnamese place in B2. I forget the name, but it's quite good, so I highly recommend.
Thanks so much. My name is Melisande Liu. I'm partnerships manager at the Clean Energy Ministerial, housed within the IEA in Paris. We work across, the SEM works across 29 member countries. Um, and its mandate is really to jumpstart and leverage the clean energy transition globally. And so our hope for COP is really to showcase our 21 work streams that work on various aspects of the clean energy transition, on solar manufacturing with Alex and his team, ISA colleagues, IRENA colleagues, but also on other topics such as hydrogen, battery storage, uh, industry decarbonization, and skills and how to empower people. So my hope is really to overcome the silos that we're currently working in and really to push climate change on the top of policymakers' agenda and to not forget about the people and the youth that need to transition along with the technologies. So thank you for inviting me to this panel.
You didn't share your favorite food so far. Okay. All right. I'll forgive you. Okay. So Sarah, please, very briefly, your name, your organization, um, what you do, top priority for COP,
Yeah.
and your favorite food at COP so far.
Okay. So can I start with the last question?
Yes, I'm supposed to be the easy one, Melisande.
Well, I haven't been able to eat. I'm only eating snacks and not all. And I lost almost 1 kilo just running around. It's a really huge cup. This is my fourth cup. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Al Halti and I'm from Saudi Arabia. I work with a company called Aqua Power, which is an investor, developer, and operator for power generation and water desalination. I specialize on developing solar and wind projects, in addition to green hydrogen projects and sustainable utilities infrastructure. I'm a climate activist. I've been in this space for the past 5 years, and I'm a Yale Climate Fellow. And my priority in this COP is definitely energy transition, but as well the co-benefit of creating green hydrogen projects and the scale up of renewable energy deployment through championing green hydrogen as a new fuel to replace fossil fuels. Yeah, that's a bit about me.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Okay, so I'm gonna ask questions to like one person, but it really this should be a conversation. So I want to jump on something Trina said. You said the same thing we're always asking for, stop fossil fuels and build more renewables. Um, why do we have to keep asking for this? And how can we make it that at COP 38, this maybe would be a given? So why don't you start, but then others, please jump in.
Hello. Yeah, no. I mean, I think we've been hearing the same thing over and over again too, with the same demands. We've been hearing from the activists that have been on the ground, from people that are first and worst affected, that we do need to phase out fossil fuels immediately. We need to cut emissions of greenhouse gases. We need to cut methane emissions as well. They're finally kind of listening to us about methane and non-CO2. But the thing is, we keep getting pushed away when we're in these spaces as well. Like I was saying, with all the fossil fuel lobbyists that are among us, there are impeding these negotiation processes. And so we do have to use our latent force as youth and as people that are not within the system to be able to actually push and drive for transformative change when it comes to an equitable and just fossil fuel phase out, which requires, um, again, cutting the emissions of greenhouse gases and also the transition to renewables. So I'll stop there because I want to hear more from you guys.
Okay. I think it's very important for us to ensure that we shift from the use of fossil fuels to cleaner energy sources because this whole discourse comes at an opportune time when we're facing the climate crisis. And to be truth be told, you realize that the climate crisis is a crisis that has no boundaries. It's actually affecting everyone everywhere. And the effects that are being felt are really detrimental. So it's very important for us to ensure that we prioritize the shift from the use of fossil fuels to cleaner energy sources. And also, as we talk about the whole just transition um, issues, it's also very important for us to realize that there are communities, especially those within the rural communities, that have never had access to electricity, that have never had a feel of this energy. So when we talk about the just transition, we are also considering those kind of communities because we also want them to be able to enjoy the benefits that are going to be brought about by the whole just energy transition discourse. Thank you.
So, coming from a fossil fuel based country that is infamous for being an energy exporter, I think it's important to bring a different angle. I'm a clean energy professional, and this is what I believe in and I'll always believe in. Um, I think there is impairment to act and to transition. And we need a space to be able to openly, transparently talk about the different contexts of different countries and their different capacities and their capability to transition. And without having that open dialogue and open discussion, we will continue to be in the same loop of same demands and no action. I think it's important to bring the finance perspective. The countries that is incapable to transition from fossil based economy into a greener economy, how can we finance that transition? I was actually reading an article yesterday that the budget to be able to solve climate change is more than what we actually have in the capital market today to invest in the solutions for climate change. So we need to be able to create different pathways that works for us. There is definitely technologies that haven't been able to scale, like CCUS, and we need to see how can we ensure more financing going to technologies where countries that still need to use fossil fuels can use it, but with zero carbon emission. So it's important to bring these perspectives into the dialogue so we can be more balanced in our view. Again, I'm a clean energy professional and I wouldn't want to see fossil fuels, but as well understanding and empathizing with the different contexts and different capabilities and capacities of different countries is important angle in this discussion.
I think you make a really interesting point about bringing in diverse perspectives. And one of the barriers that we've seen to institutional action has been that there really are very few institutional avenues for diverse perspectives to have a seat at the table in decision making spaces and decision making dialogues. We've seen that with all of the COPs. That's obviously starting to change. This is a record number of participants for a COP, a record number of youth participants, but remain very few actual institutional avenues for youth to take part in climate policy decision making, whether it's through professional opportunities and paid roles or through volunteer opportunities like Youngo. And other campaigns, we need to be able to create those institutional opportunities for diverse perspectives to be present and be taken seriously. And we need to be able to provide capacity and empowerment to particularly the communities who are affected first and worst by climate change, including young people, um, to access those opportunities and take advantage of them and make the most of the opportunities that they are given when they're given them.
Yeah, I'd love Melisande to kind of again this trade-offs, right? You balance 29 different member countries. People have competing priorities. I'm thinking something like hydrogen. We've got blue hydrogen versus green hydrogen, right? So how, as an intergovernmental or a multi-stakeholder organization, how do you kind of balance these competing interests? We want to be ambitious and we want to be fast, but also we have to account for energy access and we have to account for people who are currently reliant on fossil fuels. How do you help square that circle?
Yes, so the sum, I think one of the benefits of the sum is that we've been really very successful in navigating a lot of geopolitical tensions, a lot of the changes, the transitions that have happened before. So we're also working in the clean energy sphere. A lot has happened since SEM was established in 2009. And I think one of the key success stories or keys to our success is that we're very flexible. We work with 29 of the leading economies on clean energy issues. And as you've rightly stated, there are very different narratives on clean energy transition. There's not one shoe fits all. We have to accommodate to the fact that we have a lot of different countries at the table who have very different capacities. So for us, it's really about having a very positive approach to climate change and keeping the discussions open to for members to collaborate on certain topics. So the SEM really tries to it has basically three levers that we try to convey to our members, but also to our work streams. So we try to focus on inspiration, really making sure that countries inspire each other. But we also try to focus on impact. So that's where we bring in youth. We try to really make sure that youth comes to our ministerial meetings. We have an incredible convening power. We have one big ministerial meeting each year, and this has grown since the existence of SEM. So we're so much more closely aligned now with the COP presidencies team, the G20, the G7. So really making sure, as you've rightly said, that we create these avenues for students and youth and young people who are so much more affected. We look at it in terms of age, but to bring them to the table and to make sure they also have a stake in what energy ministers and thought leaders have to say about the clean energy transition. So from our point of view, it's really much about positive collaboration, focusing on the best practices, making sure that we communicate transparently, openly, and we really bring together the people who want to make a change and who can drive that change.
Okay, I want to concur with the point that you just said about ensuring that as we transition, we ensure that it's context specific, because you realize that speaking from someone who comes from a community where we have mining horse communities. We have a mining horse community that is called Wange, and we extract coal from that. And Zimbabwe, basically, it's mostly powered by coal, and then we have the hydropower. So you realize that when you communicate with the people within those communities, most of the issues that they raise are the issues on stranded assets. The question is always, okay, so if we are to shift, what is going to happen to us? We have invested our whole lives within the core value chain. We've put up the structures in the core value chain. We are waking in the core value chain. What is going to come after this? So it's also very important for us to ensure that we we collaborate, we partner, and be on the lookout to see how best we can ensure that the transition will address the issue of stranded assets, and at the same time ensure that we have the just energy transition. Because you also realize that if we look at the renewables, they're actually going to bring about a lot of opportunities. For instance, just quoting the green jobs, according to the statistics by the International Renewable Energy Agency, they say that in 2019 there were 12.7 million jobs, and we're actually expecting to have 122 million jobs by 2050, which is actually really huge, because already we have young people who are struggling, young people who are not employed, but then this just energy transition is going to come into play and also create green jobs for the young people, which they direly need.
I would love to add to that that today I think being in the industry, the hardest thing today is to be able to find talents that can partake of this new industry. Um, green skills, upskilling youth to be able to work in renewable energy value chain is one of the, I think, highest priority that we need to talk about. Saying that greening education partnership and greening education agenda in this COP being highlighted is really important. And hopefully in the coming COPs, we see more advanced discussion beyond greening education. How can we finance change curriculums for universities? How can we create more coalitions for universities to start really investing in youth and investing in this transition?
That's actually a good point. And we 2 years ago, the Clean Energy Ministerial, under the leadership and co-chairmanship of the U.S., the Canadian governments, and the European Commission, we launched our Empowering People initiative, and that's one of those coalition, as you said, who really try to focus in on actions and how do we get the skilling, the reskilling, the vocational training right. And so I invite all of you to have a discussion with the SAM after this. But it's definitely what we see in the SAM is. And if we look at our portfolio within the Clean Energy Ministerial, a lot of it is focused on technologies, but so little is actually focused on the discussions around jobs, around youth, and around how to get the people to transition um, along with those technologies, right? So EPI is one of those classic examples. It's we had 2 days ago actually a very good conversation here with the U.S. And the European Commission, and also philanthropies. So bringing philanthropies and also the private sector on board. We had CEOs from Fire Batteries. We had Bloomberg there. Um, really to exactly as you said to start the conversation on how we can reskill, upskill, and how we can bring in the financial sector, the philanthropies to really support this cause, because it's not just governments who make the policies, but it's also private sectors who need to heavily invest into their portfolios and make sure that skilling, upskilling is part of their top agenda.
Yeah, speaking of inviting more youth to green jobs, I just wanted to share my own experience. So, what I do at SFOC is basically advocating for power system reform so that we can enhance grid flexibility to get more variable renewables into our system. And if I get invited to these kinds of like panel discussions or debates or like even like a casual meeting with legislators, I often become like the most, like the youngest, or sometimes the only female speaker in that room. So, and if we just maintain like the current system as it is, we're gonna end up having like very male dominated and very like a with like a very higher age group of people in a room deciding everything what's going to happen in our power system and deciding about our energy policy. So I think it is critical for us to realize that we need to have more female diverse age group of people in the room and talk frankly about what we should change about our fossil fuel based power system.
I would love to add to that super briefly. I think um, w- green skilling and upskilling is absolutely necessary, and we need to make sure that the next generation and current generations have the capacity to fill these positions as they become available. I've been working in the climate space professionally for 7 years. I was 16 when I got my first full time job in the climate space, working in a subnational government, and I've since worked across NGOs and different government entities. And the roles that I've gotten have all been because I proposed a job that didn't exist. And it's really, really important, like I mentioned earlier, that we're not only empowering youth to take these roles and excel in them and ensure that we have everything from vocational jobs through to the international policy advocacy positions, but that we're creating those positions in the first place and opening doors. Because, like you said, if we don't, we're just going to continue repeating the status quo in a different industry. So it's really, really important that we open those doors for young people and particularly young women, which is why this panel is so awesome and exciting to see.
Yes, you're definitely not the only woman, and you are not the youngest person on the panel. So there you go. And actually, our session just prior to this, we had a great example in terms of green jobs from India, where we had kind of solar pumps, and we had this woman speak from Gujarat, who had created a better livelihood through kind of these solar pumps. And just a very brief plug for ISA, we do have a Star C Center where we're doing training and skilling and we need to make sure we're training and skilling lots of women as well, don't we? Okay. I really want to jump on this point that you just made about being the youngest in the room. If you look at the G20, I don't know if you've seen that kind of infamous photo where it's just like a bunch of old men, right? So how do we get old men, which hopefully I'm a man, but hopefully I'm not old yet. But how do we get old men to listen? How do we get old men to listen? I'll just leave it at that.
It's okay. I could go first. Okay. Okay. I think to get the older people, old men to listen, we need to ensure that we package the information in a manner that is understandable and relatable. Because we as the youngsters, we have our jargon that we use, and if you look at the climate space itself, the jargon that we use, it's very scientific, and it's not easily understandable in a layman's language, especially like, when you're communicating with someone who's not in the space. So for us to be able to communicate the same, I think it's very important for us to ensure that we package our information in a manner that is understandable. If it means you need to put it in a vernacular language, then do it. For instance, in Zimbabwe, we have Shona and Ndebele, and most of what we do when we interact with those kind of communities, like the communities where we have the elder generations and all that, we always make sure that we communicate in a language that they understand, be it Tonga, be it Ndebele, be it Shona. That's actually something that we can actually take up.
And if I may, I'd like to add on to her point. Well, I think the strategy of how we could make these white old men listen to what we're talking about may differ from different, let's say, regional or cultural context. So, speaking from like an East Asian cultural perspective, for me, the strategy that I took, uh, which was like the most effective one, is that I speak um on a very evidence-based narrative. So I speak with numbers, I speak with solid logic, but the one thing that I try to avoid is fall into this trap of speaking in their language, not my own. So if I get to follow their language, I end up being in this like vicious cycle, me arguing about their language, them pointing out that my logic is wrong. So that kind of vicious cycle going on, that is like the last thing that we should avoid. So while speaking on a very clear evidence-based narrative, we need to maintain we need to stay in our own narrative and send out a clear message that their narrative is going on the wrong direction. So
Yeah, maybe just adding to this. I think it's I think the youth really have the biggest stake in this conversation, and they should also realize that, and they should, um, you know, what I think is so important about youth is that they're very idealistic. They've not, they're very bold and they're very courageous in addressing issues that are wrong. And if we look at the next few decades, we need to course correct heavily. We're facing a complete change of the life as we know it. And if we don't course correct and if we don't make those policymakers realize in which catastrophe we're steering towards, I think it's really gonna uh, it's gonna be the worst for the youth who are not speaking up. So I think stay courageous, stay bold, and I think if it's necessary to take actions like Fridays for Future, then do so because it's not going to get better the older you get because the more comfortable you get, the more you have to lose actually uh, in terms of jobs. Yeah, there's more things to consider, and I really admire that about the youth today. Is that they still have these idealistic views of the world, and I really admire that. And I think it's actually the youth who are making the biggest progress in the past few years we've seen, and it's not by just sitting in the room and being nice and having fact-based. Yes, that's important, fact-based conversations, but it's actually youth that's demanding a change, and please continue to do so.
So I am of the opinion that they will never listen to us. So we have to come to them and infiltrate all of their spaces. And we're already doing that. We don't have to learn to speak their language because the science is behind us. The science is clear. The economics is supporting what we have been calling for as well. The human rights system is supporting what we are calling for. We are getting into these spaces. We're getting younger and younger, working into these spaces, 16-year-olds working with subnational governments, and all of that too. And I think really what it is finding your place, standing your ground, and making sure that you are very clear with what you want and your demands. And eventually we will be taking over. And I think, that's more long term for sure, especially when we're thinking about the near term climate crisis and the human rights emergency that is happening. There's the triple planetary crisis that a lot of people have been talking about now as well. And I think what we really need to do is working with the civil society organizations that have been supporting, working at all levels. Right now we're mobilizing before the Inter-American Court using the language of law, but in our amicus, we're having stories about how climate change is impacting so many of these activists all over the Americas and the Caribbean as well. We're putting faces, their pictures, so that when the judges are reading through the amicus, it's not just words on a text, but it is stories that come to life. And we're hoping that these kind of stories will kind of move them to action as well, and staying really strong and vigilant about infiltrating these spaces.
I will add to that very briefly, and I will disclaim this because my boss is in the front row by saying that this is my personal opinion. But I think Trina makes a really good point that just because all of these old white men are in power doesn't mean that they should be. And they're certainly not representative of the world that we live in. This panel is far more representative of the world that we live in. And so it's also a matter of how do we empower more diverse leaders. And that is often a question of electoral politics. And a lot of young people in many countries are too young to vote, particularly the younger generations who are going to be most affected by the climate crisis. But many people are not. And so by using our voices to do a lot of campaigns like Fridays for the Future, using avenues like litigation are really important ways to draw awareness to the power of the vote, particularly in democratic countries, to elect more representative leaders. Yeah, and that's very necessary.
Just a final um, addition to this, I think communication can take so many forms. It doesn't just need to be us speaking about climate change. It's so much more than that. It can also be taking action, concrete action. And so the Clean Energy Ministerial where I work is really about taking and translating the high level pledges that state leaders and energy ministers and climate ministers make, and translating that into action, and by that way communicating what can be done, and communicating the inspiration, the best practices, the knowledge that other countries need, especially our membership countries, in order to advance their climate, their energy transition, and to decarbonize their economies by mid-century.
I'd like just to concur what you said about that the economics does really support the energy transition, and working in the private sector, seeing today that renewable energy is the most efficient, the most accessible, the cheapest form of energy available today, does give the signal to our world leaders that this is the way to go. I was honestly in awe when I saw King Charles actually in his remarks mentioning renewable energy. Seeing now world leaders understanding that renewable energy is one of our primary sources as well in the IEA pathways, as well in different publications, that you see that renewable energy is the biggest champion when it comes to the energy transition. So seeing today that where I work, working on creating solar projects, for instance, in MENA region, we're seeing prices as low as less than $1 per kilowatt hour. This is amazing. question is, why is this one less than $1 per kilowatt hour is in Saudi, is in the GCC, is in the MENA region, but not the same price in Africa, not the same price somewhere in Central Asia. It can go up to $8 to $10. I know in Zimbabwe it's very expensive, and in different other parts of the world. So I think the white men that we need, the patriarchal system and the white men that we need to speak to are the financiers. These are the people who hold the money, and they continue to misprice risk, and they continue to drive the price higher for the communities that really need the most. So I think world leaders have the pressure today. The pressure needs to now dial up now on the financial sector.
And I'll just make a very brief plug here. That's we've got this Africa solar facility. This is exactly what we're trying to do. You've talked about mispricing risk. That's exactly what we're saying. We're saying a lot of this is perceived risk, and the risk is actually lower. And so we're gonna put this money into solar projects in Africa. But it's hard. It's hard to persuade people to put money into these funds, right? Um, I want to talk a little bit about so you mentioned the triple planetary crisis, and you were talking about some of the challenges in terms of energy access, land degradation, water scarcity. We've got so many different challenges. It's easy for a young person to just say, "I give up. It's just too hard. It's too much. I'm just going to go on social media and just ignore it and hope that Elon Musk saves the world," right? So how do we how do we uh, how do we convince people to stay engaged and to vote? I mean, voting, particularly in the U.S., for example, extremely low levels of voter turnout for youth. How do we get people engaged? How do we get people to vote, to be entrepreneurs, to act? How do we get them on board?
Okay, I'll go first. Um, I can say education because Nelson Mandela once said in the quote, education is the most powerful weapon that we can use to change the world. So I think the first and the foremost pillar that we should consider is to educate people to ensure that they know the importance of us shifting to cleaner energy sources, because you realize that it is only when people are informed, it is only when people know that they'll be able to act from an informed perspective. We have young people who have this creative energy, flexible mindsets, young people who are innovative, young people who can come up with fabulous technologies to help the transition. So it's very important for us to ensure that we build that network of knowledge. I always talk about telling a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend, and at the end of the day, everyone is informed. So I think first and foremost, we need to ensure that we educate people. We make sure that everyone knows, everyone has this information, especially like young people. You realize that we as young people, we interact a lot with different communities, with in different spaces. We can always leverage on those structures that we have and make sure that we make the most out of it.
I would like to narrow that question down a bit into energy policy. So when it comes to energy policy, and also as a person who's been dealing with this issue like almost 2 years, um, yeah, like asking for changing energy policies may be like very daunting and very like a long, boring job to do, especially as a youth. It may be very technical and very like full of engineering jargons. But what our organization and our team has been doing is to mobilize youth voice to be actively reflected on this energy policy. So the tool that we chose is actually litigation that you briefly mentioned. This March, we have actually filed a lawsuit against the South Korean government, claiming that their most recent national energy plan is insufficient to achieve their 2030 NDC goals plus 2050 carbon neutrality goal. So what the new plan laid out is that they cut out their renewable energy target from 30%, which was in line with their 2030 NDC target, down to 21.6%. And the rationale behind that cutback was that the power grid, is insufficient to get that many level that gets so high level of renewables. So we have gathered youth climate activists based in South Korea so that they could go out there and ask for the government directly to change the energy policy that may directly affect their lives in the future. So I think what's critical in here is that um, the realization of the tools and weapons and these like methods that we could mobilize.
I'll keep mine very short. But I was also going to say, building movements and campaigns around specific topics, using those campaigns to make sure that the information is accessible, it's easily understood, it's free of jargon. So, for example, this year, I'm also part of Youngo, and so that's the official children youth constituency of the UNFCCC system. And this year, I worked on the global youth statement. And it was a very, very long process. We gathered inputs from the local, the regional, national conferences of youth. And then we also hosted hackathons and calls and had forums and things like that. And so we came out with a 70 plus page document with all of our demands. But even then, I mean, a lot of it, even though it was written by young people, we released a child friendly version of it as well. And I've actually been using the child friendly version when we're talking about the demands, because a lot of the times when you're talking to some of these world leaders, you kind of just got to talk to them like children because they don't understand it otherwise, you know? No offense to actually, yeah. And so but I think with these movements, it's really important because, when we started with our amicus movement, I mean, people were like, what is an amicus brief? What is an advisory opinion? This is also working with the International Court of Justice advisory opinion movement with the Pacific Island students fighting climate change and World's Youth for Climate Justice. It really is important just to make sure that we're very clear and simple with the language. And from there, people will become very curious and interested and involved. And so many people now that I've been working with on the amicus want to go to law school, which is really cool. I've been engaging with a lot of Fridays for Future chapters all over, and a lot of them are asking me about law school and what it's like. And I'm trying to make sure not to be super upset about it, or as in it's hard. But yeah, I think that's really important, and I think also really the beauty of the youth climate movement as well is kind of our radical sense of hope. I think being hopeful is extremely radical, and so it may seem like doom and gloom with all these new. Every day seems like it's getting hotter and it's getting worse, and there's all these impacts that are happening, but we choose to stay radically hopeful, and I think that's really what sustains it. And we use the theories of intersectionality to understand that working on climate means working on so many of these other social justice issues as well. So I guess I'll just finish with
I'll also keep it super short and just say pay them. Youth need paid roles in private sector. Youth organizations need funding from philanthropies, from governments. Youth startups need investments from financiers. Pay them.
And that's actually what we do as well, because we do have our ministerial meetings, and I think in 2014 it rotates every year. So our ministerial meetings, our members take turns in hosting them. And so in 2014, when we had our SEM 5, I think in Korea, we did have a youth track. So we invited youth from across our constituencies to come and join and actually take part and sit at the table with the energy ministers. And we've continued that, not in all ministerial meetings, but also 2 years back at our SEM 11 in Pittsburgh, GSAF. We also had a youth track, and we also got our members to pay them to travel and to take part and to be an active voice in those decisions.
I mean, I'm trying to talk as little as possible, but I'll prompt when I need to. So we talked a lot about the kind of the level of ambition and that radical hope, and yet at the same time, you said 21.6 instead of 30. You talked about concerns around grid integration, which is my area of passion. Like we had a session on this yesterday. Solar plus LDES can save the world. But Saudi Arabia is a great example where you have companies like Aqua doing amazing things, but at the same time, you still have a lot of fossil fuel assets. Your electricity generation system is, still almost entirely fossil fuels. So how do we balance um, being proud and excited about the successes we've had, which Aqua, for example, has had a lot, um, and methane emissions is another great example where a lot of countries have made a lot of progress, but we need to move faster. And I feel like a lot of times the older people don't get that sense of urgency. So how do we say move faster without necessarily diminishing what's already going on?
You know, there is something that I always think about is um, the fact that today we already are witnessing the catastrophes and calamities of climate change. In this year in Libya, there was a earthquake and flood, and reports said that this earthquake and flood became more exaggerated because of climate change. It became 10 more catastrophic because of climate change. They had earthquakes before, but it didn't have the same impact um, and the resiliency of the country wasn't there. And why I'm mentioning that is that today, as we're trying to transform and transition our energy systems, we're we are faced with the effects of climate change at the same time. So while we're spending to transition, we're spending as well to recover. And that's a very hard trade-off for governments to make. And that's where the sector role comes. If you're able to bring financing, if you're able to come and develop projects that makes commercial sense, that has the correct financing, can work. Definitely, the question becomes is it at the pace and the speed that it needs to be. And again, it goes back to the same financing point I mentioned before. If the money was there, you can see the speed. For instance, I'll give you a brief about Saudi Arabia transition journey. So, when I did my master's in renewable energy engineering, there was no renewable energy in the country. And just in 5 years, as I worked with Aqua Power, I developed more than seven renewable energy projects. And the country have a very ambitious plan of developing 85 gigawatt, 58 gigawatt of solar and wind energy in the country. So it would comprise of the 50% of the total energy mix because this is the balance that the country is trying to achieve. For me, I would love to see 100%, but we still see issues with the grid preparation and how ready it is to integrate renewable energy. We still see the critical minerals issue when it comes to batteries. If we want to deploy lithium ion, there's still a lot of impairments to create the quick action that we need to do, and that's where youth role comes. We need to do more research, we need to do more advocacy on different level, on a private sector level, holding private companies accountable, and then looking at the industries that are hard to abate and they have the money to transition, but they're not still willing to do it because there is no enough pressure from the youth communities to these industries, which was hopefully lower the demand and accordingly lower our need to invest more on energy generation capacity expansion.
So, a couple of things, and I think it's useful to ground the sense of urgency in the science. We know that no amount of decarbonization on its own will be sufficient to keep us to the 1.5 targets. We're already seeing temperatures 2 degrees above pre industrial levels on a global average. We know that we need to act now. We know that the human cost of climate change is happening right now. Particularly in India, we're seeing it across the country in almost every form of climate impact that we talk about. Um, that being said, the science also tells us that we have solutions available. And so while we can harp on the sense of urgency and focus on the near term climate impacts, which are already occurring, we also need to be able to provide the sense of hope by saying we know that there are solutions available. We know that methane can that focusing on the non CO2 pollutants in particular can avoid 4 times more warming by 2050 than decarbonization. And so, how do we do that? What are the solutions available? The oil and gas sector in methane is a great example. Most of the mitigation of methane in the oil and gas sector is actually profit generating, right? And we've seen that play a hugely central role in this COP. In the agricultural sector in India, we work on helping states to scale up a decentralized hub and spoke model of solarized cold chains and cold storage. So not only are you mitigating the risk that particularly farmers are facing from losing their produce due to, for example, heat stress. As temperatures get hotter, food decomposes more quickly, and we lose the amount of time that we have between production and consumption to transport to sell food. And so in India, almost a third of food is lost before it even reaches the consumer. So, how do we reduce that while also expanding renewables and using refrigerants that we know are Kigali compliant? So, the Montreal Protocol controls emissions of fluorofluorocarbons and hydrofluorocarbons, which I won't try to say 10 times fast. But those are also super pollutants, which can give us huge mitigation benefits in the next 10 years. And so, how do we create projects that both simultaneously address resilience, mitigation, adaptation, and provide this concrete sense of hope in the near term that we have the solutions available, we can implement them. And I think again, this comes back to financing is we know that these solutions exist. The science is telling us that they're the most effective. How do we get resources mobilized to the projects on the ground that we know are effective so that we can scale them up in an equitable manner across the world?
Um, just to rephrase that comment, I think what we need now is a change of narrative and like rephrase just changing this concept that what youth are crying out for is not either idealistic or radical, but it's realistic. We're being realistic here. We are hardly on like concrete evidence, and we are seeing that this could actually happen in a real manner. So yeah, that kind of change of narrative should be done, and I think that's this is the point when the communication outlets comes in. So through this various communication content and different media showing the evidences that what we are talking about is not being idealistic or radical, but realistic. I think that could be the point of like changing the narrative.
I totally agree with everything that my previous speakers have just said, and I just want to talk about the capacity that we have as a country to, transition to these renewables. Zimbabwe receives 3,000 hours of sunlight per year. You can imagine how much that is. And if we are to harness that, we'll be able to create a sustainable energy portfolio for the country. um, I was just reading this article that was talking about how Zimbabwe could become a net exporter of power within the SADC region. The SADC region has like 16 countries. And if we harness this, it means that we're going to have that concentrated solar power potential of 39.5 gigawatts, of which it actually exceeds um, the needs that we have as a country, because obviously we have a less population. So I'm thinking it's very important for us to ensure that we set our priorities straight to see how best we can ensure that we prioritize what should be prioritized, and in the course ensure that we transition as whether it's the country level, whether it's regional level, whether it's at a global level. It's very important for us to ensure that we take all those aspects into account, and also to talk about the issues of accountability. I think it's very important for us to ensure that we hold the emitters to account. I just want to talk about the campaign that we have back home. It's actually focusing on ensuring that we hold corporates to account. We're saying that as corporates are operating, they're supposed to respect human rights. They're supposed to integrate corporate accountability within their core business values and ensure that and ensure that they balance between the environment and the people and profits as well. So I think it's very important for us to ensure that we take all those issues into consideration, and as we push for finance, as we hold the different governments, the different institutions to account, you know.
Maybe one last addition. I think while it's right to be radically hopeful, I think it's also important to be radically honest. And that is to recognize that we will need a whole of society approach going forward. This is not just the finance sector. Yes, I agree. They're an important element of who needs to be part of that solution, but it's really pretty much everyone, including ourselves and the youth. If we look at, and this is one of my previous roles, really putting together greenhouse gas inventories in the Dominican Republic, Caribbean. So really looking at where emissions come from. It is the energy sector. It is so much of it is consumer driven, and so much of it is really our choices as consumers. And if we look at going forward with the population, looking at the future COPs and um, 80,000 people traveling to be part of these climate negotiations. Yes, it's great. It leverages the cause, but it's really I think we have to be honest in communicating, and we have to question the choices we make as consumers, and also question our behaviors. As said before, we really need a radical departure of our path. So we need to course correct, and that means also course correcting how we live, what choices we make as consumers, and hopefully also which pathways, which career decisions we make in future.
So that segues really well into my final question. Do you have one last thing you want to say about this? Okay. Okay. So we're going to ask the two questions. You're going to think about it. We're going to take the picture because I know Melisande has to go. And then you're going to speak first, and then we'll go down the line. So two questions. One is, what is the personal action, your personal green tip? How individual personally can tomorrow reduce their green emissions? What's one thing you do, or maybe you want to do, that you think everybody should do to reduce your own carbon footprint? And the second thing is, when we all have this reunion at COP38 and we bring this panel together, what do you hope we're talking about, or maybe what do you hope we're not talking about? So yes, picture, and then we'll answer those two questions. So you've got some time to think about it. All right, Melisande, hopefully you've had enough time to think about your answers.
It's a question I ask myself every day: am I doing enough? And the answer every day is no, I'm not. I'm not, and I don't see many people asking themselves this question. So I think for my personal life, I've decided to travel as little as possible by flying. Actually, I'm trying to minimize my carbon footprint as much as I can, be it through nutrition, be it by consuming less meat and also traveling less. But it's really also about consumer choices. So trying to practice minimalism as much as I can, and to make sure that I offset and also try to leave this earth with a hopefully very small and less impactful carbon footprint.
And COP38. What do you hope to discuss at COP38? Hope not to discuss at COP38.
COP38. I hope there is no need for COP38 in future. It would be great to have a world without these negotiations and without having to discuss the issues when we know which solutions we have in front of us. So hopefully there will be no COP38 in future.
I should have made you go last, not
I know we're all just gonna say I agree. No, but I really do agree. And I think to a certain extent, there's nothing that a single person could do individually that would be enough. And so I think it's really important to use this moment to point out the fact that the entire idea of a personal carbon footprint was a marketing tactic created by the fossil fuel industry. And it's not something that I believe is a worthwhile use of our time. That being said, I think the most powerful thing we can do as individuals is have these conversations. And like you were saying, tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend. Um, Having these conversations, engaging with each other, being radically honest with each other about the impacts of our behaviors and the ways in which we can hold each other to account. Um, is not only incredibly important for reducing our climate impact, but also really important for structuring the world that we want to live in. Um, and yeah, I agree. I think hopefully there's no top 38. And if there is and we're still here, I really, really hope that we're not talking about how we can increase youth engagement and that rather we're celebrating the amount of youth in decision making positions.
I also agree with her. Actually, I attended my first COP last year in Egypt, and when I was there, I was like, okay. So we've been having this COPs for the past 26 years, and this is the 27th. And when we were there, we were actually planning for this COP that we are at COP 28. So I feel like if ever we want to be convening in this convenings, it should be about us to share about the different projects that we are working on, to appreciate and acknowledge the different efforts that we are having in the green space rather than discuss the same old issues, or we want to be included in the decision making spaces, or we want to advance renewables. We need to have these tangible actions. That is why at the onset I spoke about the importance of the political commitments that are being made here at COP translating into tangible action. And as for the how I reduce my carbon footprint personally. Well, I am one person who does not really like plastic because I know that plastic is one of the major contributors to the climate crisis. So the way that I reduce my carbon footprint is that I always carry a shopping bag whenever I'm going out, and I always pack my stuff inside that shopping bag. And I always turn off the light when I'm sleeping. I always make sure that I disconnect my my phone from the charger when I'm not my charger from the socket when I'm not charging. And yes, that is what I do to reduce the carbon footprint. And I always tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think reducing individual carbon footprints are also a must, and I think these ladies have already put it in a wonderful way. So I'm gonna talk like from another perspective. So as a person who has already been engaging with youth climate community, I think two things that I could do is to educate myself. So educating myself and learning what's going on around my community, around this world, or what's been talking about at this like international level, like COP. So that could be one thing. And another thing could be uh, building a community, enhancing solidarity, empowering women and young professionals around myself. So that could be another thing. So yes, I am here at the COP representing my 9 to 6 job, but at the same time, I'm also here as like a young climate activist. So what I have been doing here on the ground is like connecting young people who are interested in energy transition and climate activism. So I think, yeah, those two things can be like the great starting point. And what I do not want to be speaking about at COP 38 would be, uh, let's say, the key phrase stop fossil fuels. That would be the last thing that I would not want to be talking about. And yeah, although I do want that any of these COP would happen in the next 10 years. But if it's gonna happen, I really hope that we should be talking about um, the next 10 years from COP36, like how we could envision the next 10 years, maybe having more youth, having more women, having more indigenous community involved as a key player in the discussion. So yeah, that could be the one that I want to see in the next 10 years. Yeah. Also this lovely panel. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. I really wish I had gone first as well. I'm in agreement with every single thing you guys have said. So I want to say something new. So what I will say is, like Amelia said too, about the carbon budget that was, created by polluters as well to make sure that we feel guilty as an individual for our emissions. But I do think it is important for us to radically challenge our idea of consumption that has been reinforced in this capitalist extractivism, extractivist economy, society that we live in that is relying on colonization and oppression of people as well. And we have to make sure that we're really, really honest with ourselves about how we can reduce, how we can reuse and recycle and all these things, but really kind of challenging that idea of the infinite exponential growth model, which I think is a complete fallacy, and we're already living in the consequences of that. COP38, um, something new about COP38, I guess. Please, even by next year, can we not fight about phase down versus phase out? I mean, I have a very low bar. I can't even think that far ahead for COP38. I'm, I'm hoping to be very radically hopeful about that and that we won't even need one. So,
Well, I think my personal contribution is continuing to wanting to educate and make awareness, spread awareness. I think it sounds sometimes silly, and it's like it's true. I think like a lot of parts of the world are beyond the awareness. It's already a common knowledge. Unfortunately, in this part of the world, in the MENA region, so we have children and youth who don't really understand, comprehend, elderly. Every day, my mom asks me, "Are you going to this climate thing? What is even climate?" And I continue to try to convince her that it is real and what does really climate mean. So I think so. On the 9th, I'm going to be traveling, leaving the COP to go to deliver a workshop and a training on climate change to orphans. And I think I want to continue doing this until everyone really understand and is interested to be part of the army that wants to solve the climate crisis. Because as our previous speaker who left said, it's about humanizing the discussion and ensuring that everyone is part of the solution. For COP38, I'll be honest, after this is my fourth COP, I think multilateralism have really failed us, and I don't really believe I should be looking forward COP38. What I'm looking forward is everything that is happening around the COPs. The coalitions, the pledges, the countries that are coming together to create an action, and it's important that it kept accountable. So on COP38, I would love for us to hold these countries, these first movers, accountable on whatever they have pledged today, and to continue ensuring that there is the transparency that is needed. That we look after 10 years and say, you've really achieved, you haven't achieved, you failed us, you allowed us to deliver a future that makes us all proud, a healthy planet for all.
Well, thank you so much. So such incredible words from everybody. Um, I guess my hope for COP38 is that ideally a woman is the president. Maybe one of you six, 10 years from now. Um, Such great insights. Really, really appreciate your time, and thank you all for joining us. Big round of applause for our well, all right. We already did our photo, so you're free to go. Thank you so much.
You're
It's very
amazing.
confusing.
I think that
Oh, okay. We do individual photos. You just did everything.